Yeah.
Okay, we're live.
Okay, so we're gonna have a sit down with Dr. Sizer, who's a biochemist at Roosevelt University, and just ask him about his past research experience and just his thoughts on the research community as a whole. So thank you, Dr. Sizer, for being here with us.
Hi, good to be here.
Let me start out by saying, how did you decide on your field of study and major during college? Did it come naturally to you, or were you like prone to exploring other fields before settling on biochemistry?
All right. Yeah, I have been involved with a bunch of different types of research activities. It all began when I was a small child wandering in the woods outside my home. Um, it's not too far from the truth. I mean, some of the best guidance I had in instruction on how to just think and question and learn from the world around me. That came from my parents and from some really awesome teachers that I had in elementary school. So it's not too far off to say that my first meaningful research projects just started with them. But what we would recognize as like a formal, academic research experience, that would have been probably my junior year of college, extending into my senior year in a senior thesis that I did in college.
And what was the project?
That was a project that got me involved with doing electron microscopy on spinach plant leaves. Yeah. So we were looking at how the chloroplast rearranged their structures dependent on the amount and the kind of incident light. So changes in the photosystems and the way light is gathered that would play out by actual structural rearrangement of the membranes inside those leaves. It was a pretty cool project.
How did you become involved with it? Did you meet the PI beforehand, or you mentioned it was part of your senior thesis?
Yeah, it sort of became my senior thesis. I went to a pretty small college where there were quite a few faculty members sponsoring research, and got involved with it. I think after my my sophomore year. So I spent a couple of summers on campus, and then I worked during the school year too, to kind of move things along. And I had known my mentor from some chemistry classes. She was on the chemistry faculty, but she was a biophysical chemist, so she did a little bit of everything. And that's what this project involved too. So she was a very hands-off mentor, and she was really, really good at helping me get things set up. But what actually worked out to bring the project to fruition was a collaboration with a person who worked at another college, which was a few miles away. And he had a lot of the equipment and trained me on some things that I ended up using a lot. And that collaboration led to my thesis. Eventually we got a paper published because of it. And that person was my first, one of my first research mentors is still a good friend. So we've stayed connected for the last 30 years. It's been a long time. Yeah.
And what was it like being published after you did your project? What was the publication process like for you as an undergrad?
It was slow. I mean, by the time the project finished, I wasn't the last person to be involved with it. Mm-hmm. And even though I was the one who initiated it under my mentor's supervision, and it got published, I think, 2 or 3 years after I'd already moved on. So I think I got a letter or an email one day from my former mentor saying, "Hey, we got published. Here's the link," and get a stack of preprints when they still made printouts and gave them to the authors. That was pretty cool, because by that point I'd almost forgotten about it or given up on it.
And were you able to select your mentor, or was it just assigned to you?
Like I said, when I went to a small school, and so I kind of knew all the professors, and I think I had a think I'd had a chemistry class. I took PChem with this person
Mm-hmm.
before I really got into the meat of the project. But this was somebody that I knew, and I think I just approached her and asked if I could work in her group during the summer, um, and then it just kind of turned into the project that it became.
So I guess is your school, would it be compared to Roosevelt University in terms of size and faculty?
It was much smaller. I went to Lawrence University in Wisconsin, and a lot of things are similar to Roosevelt. So, private institution, liberal arts focus, kind of place where you get to know a lot of people and they get to know you. But I was living on campus, so that was a different situation. I spent more time in the lab, and being part of that project took on a pretty big part of my experience there over the last couple of years. But there were certainly a lot of similarities in terms of how how accessible people were, and the fact that you got these seasoned and accomplished research faculty working largely with undergraduate students and making opportunities available to people, whereas other types of institutions, those people are running labs. They've got postdoctoral fellows and PhD candidates and other sort of professional scientists already working with them, and they don't have as much time to spend directly with undergraduates. So that's something that I really enjoyed and benefited from, and that's something that of course we try to encourage as much as we can here at Roosevelt.
And I guess how would Roosevelt students be able to approach researchers on campus in order to get started with research? Do you have any tips and advice that they should heed?
Yeah, I think you just talk to people. You do have to kind of reach out in that spirit of inquiry. The same skills, the same desire to learn and to know that are going to help you be successful in a research project are the ones that are going to help you get that project started in the first place. So it takes a little bit of kind of stepping out outside of what you might normally be comfortable with, just to make that interaction. So, I would say there's a lot of things that go along with research that you don't even think of, or that you don't normally associate with a research experience. And one of those things is having that willingness to step into the unknown and to take certain risks.
Mm-hmm.
Those are things that we're not necessarily conditioned to do, or that we think are okay to do when you're taking classes and your focus is on making the grade and on maybe playing it safe and making sure you get what you need to move on. Research can be different from that. In fact, it's fundamentally different from that in a lot of ways. And one of those ways is how you do have to sort of take risks, or go into unknown situations a little bit. That starts with approaching people about potential research projects, and seeing your faculty, sponsors, and your mentors as much more of a colleague, or an equal, and that you both have a genuine desire to move discovery forward and to find out new things.
And where can students gather, I guess, information about potential research projects, whether on campus or off campus?
For us at Roosevelt, I'd say that word of mouth is still the most effective way. Our website is not necessarily built to do, to have continuously updated information about research opportunities. As situations change, like getting, hypothetically, if there were a global pandemic and everybody had to do all their learning remotely, I'm not saying that would happen, but if it did, people would have to change their research focus, and they would have to alter, and find new opportunities for conducting research. So that means that what you might have on a website from 6 months ago is not nearly going to be up to date. or appropriate for what's happening now. So usually it is it is word of mouth. Typically, students will get to know their instructors, get to know potential research mentors by having classes with them, and communicating with them outside of class. Finding out more about what they have in common, what they're interested in. It can also be by referrals. Someone who's been involved with the research experience, our alumni, or even current students, or recently current students like yourself. People can spread the word on campus and say, here, if you're interested in this, go talk to Dr. So-and-so, find out what they're up to now.
And then what else do students have to gain from these mentorships besides guidance on a research project?
Yeah, like I've sort of alluded to before, when you're doing a research project, it really falls under the category of experiential learning. And it has a lot of things in common with other types of experiences like doing community service, or other, community-based work, an internship, etc. It's about finding connections between your academic work, which is largely theory-based, some applications, some discussion of that, and finding out what real-world practice is like. So if you're aspiring to a career where you're going to have technical experience, where you're going to have project management and time management, where you might have responsibility for leading others, for collaborating. In other words, just about anything you do, you can benefit from having a research experience. On the other hand, maybe, or going along with that, I'm not sure what the proper transition is. I want to emphasize that there are lots of things that can help you do that. There are many types of experiences that one can have that are truly individualized and inquiry-based and so on, that don't necessarily involve working in somebody's research group, in the chemistry lab on campus. And we, unfortunately, no matter how much we try, we're not going to be able to have the same type of experience for every interested student. And that's okay, because what I think we're trying to encourage is that same idea of developing independence. So as you go along in your academic program, whether you end up doing bench-based work, whether you end up doing dry lab or in silico work because you're working through databases, or you're doing modeling studies or statistics or something like that, or whether you're working in a finite sort of a fixed term internship or something like that, those can all be beneficial experiences, and they all encourage some autonomy and individual responsibility and individual development as a young professional.
Did your own experience with your mentor and your own senior thesis inspire you to go to graduate school and become a researcher, or was it always an interest of yours and those experiences helped propel you forward?
Well, yeah, some of each. So, I was one of those kids who always knew I wanted to be a scientist, but when you're 5 years old, and as it turns out, when you're 15 and even when you're 20, you don't have a good idea of what that might look like, or what it takes, or what's involved to get you from that interest through to practice, through to the career. And I know the same is true for a lot of people who are aspiring to be physicians or to be just about any professional area. If you don't have somebody there who's been through it and can tell you about it and show you what it looks like, it can be a goal without a path. And so for me, not having anybody in my family who had been to, who'd gotten a PhD, let alone one in the sciences, it was something that I had to, I didn't know that much about. So fortunately, again, being where I was in college and having people to work with, it became clear, like, okay, you want to get a PhD, you got to look at, putting in applications, this is what it might look like, and so on. So I got a lot of help with that. And I think what really helped from my mentors, my scientific mentors, was that they had gone through these types of training programs themselves, and they knew how to go through that process. And they also encouraged me to apply to places that I would never have considered. So, I ended up going to a really good graduate school, really good graduate program, and having it all paid for, because they said, hey, go to a place where you can get a fellowship, go to a place that's doing a lot of different types of research, because then have some options. Put in your applications here. And I thought, I need to stay close to where I live. I might need to, spend a bunch of money to do this, or just didn't know what to expect. And they were like, no, apply here, apply there, put yourself out there. And it really did work out, because I had no idea. I had no idea what to expect. And then they were like, go for it, go for it. And then I did, and I was like, okay, I'll do this.
And is your style of mentorship inspired by your previous mentors, or did you carve out your own style over the years?
Well, everybody has their own style. I've had several different types of mentoring interactions where I've been the mentee. And I've talked a lot with friends and colleagues who talk about their own experiences and what they had. And it really does run the gamut. There's people like maybe my first mentor who, I might go and see her once a week in her office. And, except for that, I was pretty much left to my own devices. That didn't work out as well. And then I have not had personally, but I worked with other people who had mentors who said, you show up for 4.5 years, you come in, 5 days a week, and you work as hard as you can from, 9 to 5, and, you're going to get this number of papers, and you're going to get this work, and it's done. So you make that commitment now, and that's what's going to happen. And sure enough, it happened, and then, and that's because they had this sort of regular system, like, the PI just kept track of what they were doing, and they were in close connection. They didn't really stray too far from that, and it was productive. So lots of different things out there. For myself now, I recognize now what it's like for people who serve as mentors, because they have many competing interests and demands on their time. So, as a teaching professor, I have to balance my research sponsorship against my teaching responsibilities, against other forms of service and professional work. So that means for me, making calculations each semester about like how many people I can have and what kind of work they can be doing, and so on and so forth. So I do try to, check in with people, or have them check in with me, at least a couple of times a week if they're doing research, if they're doing like bench work, and maybe less frequently than that if they're doing some work as with data analysis or something like that. So it depends on the nature of it. A lot of the work is a lot of the bench work is front loaded, where you need to have many consecutive hours, many consecutive days up front. And then as people get more comfortable, more confident, they're taking on more ownership of their project, then you don't have to see it as much.
And what do you look for in a mentee, characteristic-wise?
So you can always, I think what I don't know, there's no, that's a good question. Oftentimes they're looking for me, I'm not looking for them. So because of the way our system works, I think the openness that we have to promoting student research, I am not going to go out and recruit a lot of people. It tends to be more people who are curious and interested, and may have identified either on their own or from someone else that they may benefit from a research opportunity. So when they come to me through whatever means, I'm interested to talk to them about what it is that motivates them, what they're willing and able to do to act on that, how much time they can spend, what success would look like in that interaction and in that situation, those sorts of things. So I usually find that just about everybody who comes to me and expresses an interest is a person who has the ability to be successful and to really learn something, if not actually, produce something out of that experience.
And how flexible are these research projects for students who might want to join but have off-campus responsibilities that they need to tend to?
Yeah, it's a good question, because you have to be realistic about it. I have to be realistic about the time that I can devote in training and mentoring people. And I think my students have to be realistic about the time that they can devote. So we always acknowledge that something might happen, right? We've got to stop in the middle of the semester and, discontinue our work. Or things might happen that are going to mean a heavy workload when you've got midterms or when you've got projects due in your courses. So we always kind of build that in. The thing that I'm always looking for is how how people are able to view the progress of their work and the goals of the project in the larger sense. So we always have flexibility, but along with that, that's going to be flexibility, built on top of a dedication to and a commitment to work hard on the project, to treat it like any of your other responsibilities, and to plan out things on realistic timeframes.
I wanted to focus a little bit and talk about research in biochemistry in general.
Okay.
What does it typically consist of? Is it usually, like you said, you mentioned bench work a lot, and what area of research besides biochemistry do you love to explore and contribute to?
Well, so there's a little bit of biochemistry in everything that I do. I was trained in and got my PhD in cellular and molecular biology. I was an undergraduate biochemistry major at a place that didn't have a biochemistry major, so I kind of made my own made my biochemistry degree. I did cellular and molecular biology, which ran the gamut from everything, plants and other model organisms, right up to human cell physiology. As a postdoctoral fellow, I worked in a biochemistry department. Well, maybe I'm more of a biochemist than I ever thought. I worked in a biochem department, but we were studying yeast as a model system for genetic disease. Lots of stuff like that. So it's gone all over the place, and mostly I've been asking questions about cellular level events or cellular processes and how they are affected by changes in the external environment. So that goes back to the work with plants, changing the levels of incident light and watching the membranes rearrange themselves, and it carries on through some of the stuff I've been doing recently with monitoring the physiology of yeast as they go through various changes.
Given the pandemic and you not being able to go into the lab, how are you able to shift your research or continue it moving forward?
Well, it's shifted in the sense I'm not doing a whole lot of it right now. We can, we're limited in how we can have people in the labs and so on. The one thing that started before the pandemic and has kind of become part of my regular practice is to incorporate research opportunities into coursework. This is a trend that's been going nationwide. It's extended into undergraduate courses of all types. And it recognizes, again, the fact that there are various limits and barriers to research participation in what we would consider these traditional experiences, right? Where, someone's got time every day, 5 days a week to, go over to the lab after their classes and spend, 3 hours doing experiments. That's just not realistic for a lot of students for various reasons. And I think it's particularly true of Roosevelt students because we have a lot of people who are commuting, we have a lot of people who are working, we have a lot of people who have other responsibilities in their lives, and they still want to make this happen. Um, so I kind of forgot where I was going with all this, but
Incorporating
so
research.
one of the things, yeah, so what we've done in response to this partially, especially for the graduate students, is to uh, have like a research methods course and use that as the starting point or the platform for students to do, experimental design, et cetera. We've also tried to do that to the extent that we can in the undergraduate courses and the undergraduate core, so that students can, again, work in groups, work in pairs, learn more of the nuts and bolts of a research project by doing project-based learning and other types of experiences, so that they can start with that and then maybe turn that into a project of their own, or apply some of the skills that they learned through that when they're taking part in a more traditional, faculty-sponsored research project. So I like that. I like that kind of stuff a lot, because even though it may not yield as much, new information that's publishable, it generally tends to give students more time and more practice in building the skills that they would need to be successful in their own research work.
Mm-hmm. A lot of the students at RU in the sciences department, at least, are pre-health professional students. And I guess what skills can they gain from a research experience that can be transferable to their careers as healthcare professionals, whether it's interpersonal skills, inquiry, and so on?
Well, I always hope that involvement in a research project can lead somebody to say, "Oh, hey, maybe I don't want to be a doctor. Maybe I want to be a researcher." That's my selfish, basic science person talking. But what I like even more is when somebody might say, "Oh, I really understand now what it is that clinical researchers do," or "I think I want to go into an MD PhD program," or "I think I want to get involved with a research group that's going to, be involved in medical research of a type that I'd never even considered before." So there's all those sorts of things, in addition to what I think are the benefits that accrue to an individual from any type of, inquiry-based experience. And that, again, are the things with time management, project management, individual scholarship, collaborative work, etc. So all those things come from, can be a part of the research experience. And it's especially true, and it really does work when you think of it as something that's more than just, this is something I'm doing for credit, or, my program says I have to do research, so I'm going to show up, one day a week and do this. No, it's really about taking ownership. And typically that's something that I find that pre-med students or pre-health profession students are already pretty well disposed to do.
My next question is about collaborative research and interdisciplinary research. How many collaborative research projects have you been involved with? Whether and how are these projects achieved? Do you have a network of researchers that you reach out to, or is it just a continuing spectrum?
Things just sort of pop up. So I told you the story about my first real research project in college, and how it started with one person, and then it really sort of thrived when I got connected with somebody else. Oh, and I forgot to add to the story that the two people, my research mentors, actually got this connection going because they lived next door to each other. So they got to talking. They said, "Hey, Pfizer should go work with you and this," and then it worked out very well. So stuff like that just happens. And when I was a postdoctoral fellow, I was living in Madison, and I was working on a project, and it was kind of going, but mostly not going. And one day a message came into my PI from someone at another small college. And they said, "Here's something I'm interested in. I think it might be, here's some data that I have. It might indicate that this is happening, that a particular gene is doing something. Do you have anybody who would be interested in contributing to this?" And that person turned out to be me. So I basically got into another project with a PI who was at another school entirely, but fortunately I was able to work on that project and was able to support myself to do it. I had the funding, and that turned into my main sort of bread and butter research project. So, I mean, that's how collaborations happen. People just kind of talk to each other, or there's just some element of serendipity, or you go to a conference and you're like, hey, this was an interesting paper that you wrote. What's going on with that? And they say, oh yeah, we've got this thing that, you know, we haven't been able to figure out. You know, do you want to help us out with it? So that can and does happen.
I guess people have this image of research as sort of a competitive environment where it's sort of like a race. Would you say it's more collaborative than competitive, or has that competitiveness led to awesome discoveries?
You know, in things that I've been involved with, it's been some of each. I mean, it's just human nature. You know, you have people who are hyper competitive and very driven. And this kind of gets back to that thing about mentoring styles. You know, I told you that I worked in labs where the mentors, the PIs were pretty chill, and I worked in and I've again heard of labs where people would hire 2 or 3 postdoctoral fellows, and then they would put them all in the same project. They would basically have them doing the same thing, and they would see who got there first. So it's good to know the lab environment that you're going into, and find something that matches who you are and how you work. So, but by and large, you know, with that having said, especially in basic academic research, people are generally willing to share ideas, or at least communicate their ideas, you know, after they've published them or when they've got them submitted to the journal. And they're certainly willing to share reagents and supplies and so on, like, because that expands the scope, it validates the work, and it encourages people to contribute. Obviously, if you're working in a commercial, like if you're working in, you know, an industry environment, working in a lab where there are much more you know, much more strict limits on intellectual property, and things are subject to patent, etc. You can't do that as much. But anybody who's involved in inquiry, anybody who's involved in the scientific process is going to want to talk about what they've discovered, and is going to want to involve other people and get them to take an interest in that as well. So I think that's one of the nicer things about working as a researcher in general, and particularly as an academic researcher, is that generally you're building, you know, you're a member of a community, and you can go and you know, be an active part of that, as active as you want to be.
What challenges does the research community face as a whole?
You mean right now, or in general, or?
In general.
Yeah.
Right now.
You can probably guess the, you know, number one thing is funding. You know, we set our national priorities, we set our global priorities, and, you know, obviously I want to have, you know, continuing scientific discovery to be one of those priorities, because we've got a lot of challenges and a lot of issues to face, and those challenges can largely be addressed by scientific inquiry. You know, we want people to continue to do science. So there are challenges to the community, you know, both short-term and long-term. One of the short-term ones, of course, is how you keep collaborations going, how you keep lab activity happening, you know, in the face of you know, quarantines and restrictions on interactions, and kind of the overarching concerns about COVID-19. That's a huge problem, and we have to, you know, we can't ignore that it's not a problem. We can't ignore that it is a problem. But there's always, you know, a silver lining too. When it comes to research collaborations, when it comes to communication, the pivot from in-person to virtual meetings, you know, interviews like this, and huge conferences with thousands of people. The fact that all these things are moving online opens up a lot of the opportunities for people to find out more about what happens in research, how people go about it, who's involved with it, what they're talking about, because it just lowers those barriers to access and participation. And I think it can make science more accessible and more democratic.
You mentioned conferences, obviously. What would you say to students who may, undergraduates especially, who may be intimidated by going to a professional conference where they'll be surrounded by PhDs and postdoc fellows and so forth? How should they go into these conferences with an open mind?
That's a very good question. So there is no substitute, for being at a conference, and being able to just facilitate those random interactions and wander around a poster hall, or go through the go into a session and hear about something that you might have never even thought about before, but maybe the title was interesting. That's hard to rebuild or to emulate in a virtual format. But the idea is still the same. It's kind of like what I was talking about at the very beginning, like just being willing to kind of step out of yourself, step out of your comfort level, and go into a place that is actually going to be much more welcoming than you ever would have thought. Because the fact that you're interested enough to, to click that Zoom link or go on site to a conference and find out what people who work in labs all day, have to say about something, that's a sign that you must actually be, somewhat interested and motivated to want to get into it yourself. So I would definitely say, go ahead and do it. Just get involved, especially if, there are incentives to make it cheap or free for you to attend, which are some of the things that we're offering now. We're able to do through our, through grants and sponsorships of various kinds. I've worked with a lot of students who are first generation college students, or certainly would be first generation graduate students, like I was. And I tell you, I will definitely remember the first time I went to a scientific conference, and I worked with those students, and they go to something like Abercans, they go to something like a society meeting, and once you walk in that door, it's like, oh, there's someone who won a Nobel Prize 2 years ago, and oh, here's somebody who just published an article in Science, and why are they why are they so sloppy when they eat a hot dog? It just makes it more. It makes it like, oh, this is a group of people who are all doing this, and they care about it. And up until that point, you don't feel that, you don't know that. It's just words on paper and names on names below titles. Once you experience that as a community of practice, it's a totally different thing, and people are like, oh yeah, I could do this. So I always recommend, just going ahead and becoming a part of it.
And speaking from your experience as a first generation graduate student, were there any moments where you felt overwhelmed, or have you ever had negative or learning moments you could talk about?
Well, I've tried really hard to suppress those memories, so thanks a lot. And we're recording this. Yes, so there are always, bumps along the way, and maybe even things that are worse than bumps, like obstacles, like mountains that you have to climb, or at least it feels like you do. And in those, in those moments, you have to look at and talk to and remember the words of people who have gone before. That those sorts of things, like, not getting that paper accepted the first time or the third time or the fifth time, or struggling with your qualifying exams, or having to take a few extra months to get the data that you need for that last paper so you can finish your thesis. That is actually the norm. It is not the exception. So you see that from you see that in hindsight, even though you can't always anticipate it when you're going in.
One last question.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of students tend to view research as a very rigid sort of lab work, getting published sort of journey, but I would like to hear your own personal definition of what research means.
The definition that I use is not one that's my own. I don't remember who said it, but it's one of my favorites. So it's that research is the process of going down alleys to see if they are blind. So, and that kind of sums it up for me, because when you are going into a place that you don't understand, you don't know what's going to happen. Like, you don't know, will you hit a wall and have to come back out? Will you step in something that is nasty? It's to go into the unknown, but it's not nearly as like scary as all that. It's because when you're doing it, you've got a flashlight. You've got somebody who has done this before, who's going along with you. So maybe it's more like cave exploration than going down alleys, blind alleys, but it is finding out. It's about finding out. And so the whole thing about asking good questions and being motivated and having good time management and so on, those are things that are means to that end of just being able to find out for yourself, find out for the rest of the world, so you can tell them what's happening, just to see what's there. That's research to me. So if that's the definition, it goes way beyond just working at the bench in a laboratory. It can be lots and lots of other types of things, even within the scope of the same or single project.
Thank you so much for being here with us today. Taking time out of your busy
You're
schedule.
welcome. Thanks for some excellent questions.
That's it. So Laura,